President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin, I'm glad to welcome you at the 7th Annual Investment Forum, or conference arranged by VTB Capital Bank. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to meet you, for your time and effort. This is your 7th participation at this forum, and certainly this is the keynote and central point of our meeting. We are working since morning. We had a morning session today, and the panel session brought together the Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Ulukayev, Finance Minister Anton Siluanov, Elvira Nabiulina, Governor of the Bank of Russia, and also representatives of the Business Society of Russia, Igor Sechin, head of Rosneft, Oleg Deripaska from Rusal, and Sergei Galitsky, founder of Maganit. The session was quite interesting, at least that's what the participants said, and we exchanged our viewpoints, and Mr. Sechin added some oil into the fire, criticizing the policy of the Finance Ministry in terms of taxation of the oil companies, and he was supported by Alexei Ulukayev, and on the contrary, Mr. Siluanov was supported by representatives of the private business. So we discussed different models of economic development, investment models, consumption models. Generally speaking, we agreed that the situation is totally under control in the country, that the policy is transparent. I think that it was quite interesting for the investors. And now, let me introduce to you the participants in our today's panel session. On my right, Mr. Jean Desazar de Montgaillard from Lafarge Holcim from France. This is the biggest manufacturer of cement and concrete and building materials. They have a long history. The company dates back to 19th century when the Suez Canal was built. The company invested about 1.5 billion euro into the Russian economy. They have 4 plants in Russia. And Mr. de Montgaillard has already delivered his speech. He spoke about the future for the developments in Russia, affordable housing, environmentally friendly housing, and other interesting projects which the company is ready to implement here based on the innovations and high-tech traditional construction materials, but still he said that focus would be made on the construction materials high-tech. Mr. Lazarus Zima from South Africa, he is a well-known entrepreneur. He has certain stakes in the extraction industry, and he said that the investments can proceed not only from different countries flowing into Africa, but African companies are interested in operating at the Russian market, investing into Russia, and this should be a two-way street if we speak about Russia and Africa. And our third guest, Stefan Schulte, he is chairman of the executive board of Fraport, which owns not only the Frankfurt airport, but also a number of other airports all over the world. And in 2012, you know, a new airport, Pulkovo, was commissioned, and his company has a stake there, whereas VTB has a controlling stake there. So I'm passing the floor to Stefan Schultke. He will tell us about the investments which his company made, any payback, any plans of Fraport company, any propositions as to how to develop further. So if you don't mind, I'm passing the floor to Mr. Schultke first.
Well, thanks very much, and first thank you very much for this organization of this high-end quality conference. It's really already a brand on Russian conferences, bringing together international leaders on economics as well as on politics. And thanks a lot. Thanks that I may join this panel another time. you know, and you mentioned it already, we are in the aviation business. We are in the aviation business already for decades, and we believe in the growth of the aviation business. All prospects, all studies I know are clearly mentioning a growth in between 3 to 5% per year on aviation worldwide, also in Russia. And that's the reason we're in that business, because if you take all the studies together, you know that connectivity is really important for growing industry. So the better you connect cities on a direct way, the better it's connected by highways, by train, by aviation, the better the situation is for the cities, that companies take their seat, create jobs, and so on. So it's positive for the GDP of the different cities, and that's, for example, also very important for St. Petersburg. But we are active worldwide. Our core asset, as you know, is Frankfurt, and we are also prepared to invest whenever we see a potential and a stable environment for the future. So in Frankfurt, we just created a new or constructed a new runway. We started now with Terminal 3. I learned this morning the governor of the central bank has been in Lima. Andrew Kostin also has been in Lima, and others, I don't know exactly. Lima is also an airport we managed for 12 years already, and I'm really glad because it has been chosen already 6 times in a row for the best airport in South America, sorry very much, in South America. I hope you could experience the same on Lima. So our goal is, of course, that we also would like to be chosen the best airport in Russia for 6 times in a row on St. Petersburg, because that's the reason why we are active in St. Petersburg. We want to create the best product, and we want to create a better connectivity for such a great city, St. Petersburg. That's the reason for OTB here, Fraport, and I know our third partner, the Kopoulousis Group from Greece, is also here. I've seen Mr. Kopoulousis already this morning. And we are committed. We are committed as long-term investors. But we also need, of course, for high investments, we need, of course, also somewhere growth. Growth of the city, the right environment, growth at the end on aviation. That means we need the right environment, we need somewhere the growth potential, and we have to explore the growth potential, and I hope we can discuss this, and of course in a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schulte. Mr. Putin, would you like to say something? We'll proceed with Q&A immediately.
Well, first of all, thank you for your invitation and for organizing such a high-profile forum. I believe that it's of interest and of avail for this country. It's of huge interest, and I hope that for the participants attending the forum, many of them coming from abroad, is going to be instrumental. Well, actually, you have presented the panelists, which are quite influential ones. Here we can see the best economists, financiers, and best global bankers, and probably I'll hardly add something on the merits of the issues you've been discussing, but my presence is only to show that we back them and we will implement the policies they've been speaking about, the ones that have been stated in detail with many figures and data provided. It's not something stark or frozen. Our economic policies respond to the global and domestic economic and financial developments, introducing some amendments to the fundamental tenets. And we will do our best in order to provide for macroeconomic stability, and we will respond in a sensitive way to what happens in global finance and economy and on international markets. And if there are some clarifying questions, I'm ready to take them and respond to them. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure that it'll
Thank you so much, Mr. Putin, and I'm sure that such a lively discussion, when you answer all the questions, is worth attending. But as a host, as a moderator, I would like to ask the first question myself. Information has been published that this is for the first time over the last 27 years that the money is leaving the emerging markets. So there would be a net outflow from China, from Brazil, from Turkey. And actually Russia loses 2 times less money than in the previous years. This is a positive trend. So against the background of such a rapid outflow of investment money, does Russia need any foreign investors or not? Do we expect any inflow of foreign investors, or will do the import substitution? And if we really need such foreign investors, and if Russia really calls, this is the title of our forum, then where to? What are the privileges? What are the advantages of Russia? So that we could say that the investors, you may invest here or here, and you will have certain carrots, so to say, instead of sticks. How can we attract the investors to Russia, not to other countries? What's the most attractive feature of Russia? What is its competitive edge?
Well, I don't need to speak in front of this audience what the reasons for the outflow of capitals from the emerging markets are. Probably the changes in the Federal Reserve policies and many other factors are to justify this, and we are observing a drop in prices on export goods of the emerging economies. But at the same time, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that this capital outflows, if we take this country, has been witnessed since the second quarter of 2010. And the third quarter of this year, we are witnessing an inflow, absolute inflow of capital. And I believe that the colleagues have mentioned it today. If so, it means that the market responds quite swiftly to what is happening in this country and in this economy. And what is happening? Well, naturally, we are facing the crisis manifestations. I have named the reasons, but they are more numerous than the ones I called, but these are the key ones. Still, some experts believe, and I see it eye to eye with them, that the trough of the crisis was reached, and the economy on the whole, the Russian economy on the whole, has adjusted or is adjusting itself to the changed environment. And that testifies to the first signs of stabilization, despite the fact that many sectors of our economy were witnessing a decline, but for the agricultural sector, still things are starting to look up, and processing industries feel more confident. And when we are accommodating lower commodity prices, including hydrocarbon prices, new niches for new sectors opening up for machine engineering, agriculture, for processing industries and other sectors as well. This is factor number one that can be appealing to investors who want to put up money in oil and gas and other sectors. But apart from this, and it's true, in this country we can highly educated and high-skilled population and human resources. Well, a lot must be done. Still, there is room for advancement, but the basis is quite okay. And some kind words with respect to the central bank and Russian government on my behalf. Despite all the hardships that we've been facing, our management team has demonstrated high responsibility in managing the economy and consistency and the ability to attain results. And I believe this is a very good premise for investors to believe that Russia is a good place to put up money. With respect to domestic investments, yes, we have seen a decline in fixed investment, but on the whole, it remains quite high, including public spending, 1.5 trillion rubles last year, 1.6 trillion rubles this year. And if it's possible, to the degree or possibility, not breaching macroeconomics, we try to be flexible. I'm referring to the finance ministry and central bank, and you probably have mentioned that there are some programs by the central bank aimed at a project or special purpose funding in order to make interest rates lower for end consumers, and you have mentioned different funds. You can't but know about some positive trends in reducing the red tape in the economy and the enhancement of our ratings and our positions in different lists in this respect. So, which means that Russia is quite a safe and promising place for joint cooperation.
Mr. Schulz?
Asked whether we are allowed to ask questions, whether we can give proposals. The environment is difficult. As we are here in this plenum, I think we all believe in the future of Russia, and we know that the recovery will come as soon as possible. If I take the aviation industry, yes, it's going through a difficult time. You know altogether the situation of Transaero. If we take St. Petersburg, we know that Aeroflot is more focusing at the moment on Moscow. That's all fine. If we would like to explore the potential of St. Petersburg and invest even more, and we want to invest because investment means jobs and means further potential for the GDP, I think a good proposal would be to open the sky somewhere for more charter traffic on St. Petersburg, because St. Petersburg is a great city with a lot of potential for tourists, and if we could have some chances to discuss those issues, would be really great, because we know that there's a big appetite from a lot of European countries to go to St. Petersburg to see this great city, and to create there more connectivity is always helping, and not just for tourists, and it's also bringing business.
Да, мне остается только поддержать все, что было сказано нашим коллегой. Тем более, что
I can be supportive of what has been said by you. And also, you've been speaking about St. Petersburg, which is my native city, and the potential is great. It is yet to unlock, and we will work together with you to develop their potential. And the airport, indeed, that you have been managing is splendid. And if you remember, I attended and participated in the first steps of the construction, the groundbreaking, and etc. And I'm quite pleased that the project has been brilliantly implemented. I am quite confident that it's going to be fully loaded and will work and operate efficiently.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. So let's proceed with the questions from the audience. You may ask anyone. I suspect that most of the questions would be to Mr. Putin. Yes, first sector, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Kostin. This is something of a follow-on to Mr. Kostin's question. I'm Mike Rossborough of the California Public Employees Retirement System. So the last 12 months have been very difficult for the Russian economy. So do you think the most difficult phase of the reconfiguring the economy for lower oil prices and for less access to external financing has fully been completed? And if so, can we expect a renewed growth next year in 2016? And if not, when do you think the process will be completed? And in that capacity, what are the hardest tasks for the ministries of the Russian government?
По-моему, это ошибка. Я задачи министерствам не могу поставить. Это вопрос Владимира Владимировича.
This is a question to Mr. Putin, probably. I cannot instruct the ministries.
Well, we've been speaking about this, and I believe next week our Parliament is to start hearing the draft budget for 2016, and Economic Development Ministry provides forecasts about development, and the Finance Ministry lends them a helping hand, and we believe, well, last year, as you know, we have had a decline, and this year we're going to have a certain decline as well, but I'm I believe that in the upcoming years we will rebound. And in my introductory remarks, I said that probably we reached the trough of the crisis, if not past it. And some of the colleagues believe that we are getting out of the woods. And all our plans for the upcoming years focus not only on really emerging out of the depression of certain sectors of our economy, but maintaining and restoring the positive pace by and large. And I'm confident it will be the case, and all the forecasts that we have, and they're quite profound and professional ones, speak of that. And we will do that building on quite realistic and prudent forecasts in terms of hydrocarbons price, I mean oil and gas, at around $50 per barrel. That will give us an opportunity to focus more of our resources on resolving the main task that we've long been facing, and in the current context it's easier to resolve it than in the past when the prices were high. And the task is to provide structural change for our economy, which is what we will focus on.
Thank you so much. Yes, please. Second sector. We heard a lot about the crisis, about political difficulties. How do you see the prospects of the development of relations between Russia and Germany? Prospects of the German companies in Russia? We heard about the decision to build the Nord Stream 2. Any ideas how Germany may participate in the high-speed railway in Russia?
Germany, well, on an international scale, is one of our major economic partners. And it's not only about the figures of the trade, but rather the depth of interpenetration and the penetration of German enterprises in the Russian economy. German business community enter the Russian market not only for quick lucre and profits, no. They are active participants of our machine engineering, generating sector, agricultural sector, pharmaceuticals, and those key areas of our economy that are in the focus of our attention and have been and will be. This is first. Second, I'd like to mention a well-balanced approach of the German companies in terms of how they develop their relationship with Russia. They don't fluctuate with respect to the political situation, and they are quite pragmatic, building on their interests and the interests of their partners, and we appreciate that. With regard to specific projects, they have been set out long ago, probably the ones you have mentioned. Nord Stream 2 is part of the greatest Nord Stream project, and it was presented back in 2010, and then it has been consistently implemented. First, Nord Stream Train 1 was implemented, and in parallel with implementation of Nord Stream 1, shareholders and companies and partners came up with their ideas to expand the project further on. So it's no novelty. And this project aims at providing the need for energy for Northern Europe. given the declining production in Norway and the United Kingdom and the growing demand at the same time in that region of Europe. So it's not designed to strip someone of transit capability, and all those political talks and speculations, please leave them aside. With respect to the Ukrainian transit and supplies to southern Europe, we have special plans for that area with our German and Turkish and French partners. And there may be many different participants of future projects. Nord Stream 2 bears no relation to those, and it's not an impediment to anyone. With respect to high-speed roads, well, such infrastructural projects are important, and we would welcome your company and other companies in transport engineering in Russia, and we appreciate this. It's a mutually beneficial area, and we would continue to cooperate. And as we know, our Chinese partners develop their transport hardware construction on the basis of German technology. With respect to high-speed railways, like Moscow to Kazan trunk railway and further on, it's a matter of economics, of costs, and including the costs of borrowing. So it's not a question to our government, but to yours. If such projects participants have limited access to European funding, there will not be many options on the table, and in this case the Chinese proposal may be the decisive in terms of funding. And the second aspect is price. If we are able to come to terms on these matters, we would be really glad to see your company among those implementing similar projects on our soil. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please. Sector 6.
Mr. President, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask this question. My name is George Sibulela. I'm from South Africa, chairman of Black Business Council, and I serve on the South African Presidential Advisory Group. I want to also note the role that Russia has played in the transformation of South Africa during the political times, particularly for the ANC, which was really appreciated. My question is around the BRICS countries. One is China-Russia a strategic partnership, a strong and a stable one? And we have seen a lot of the Chinese traveling to Africa for various opportunities, becoming much more active. And secondly, what do you see as the priorities in terms of economic cooperation with China, similarly with Africa?
Мы знаем об активности.
Well, we know that the Chinese business community is very active in Africa. Nothing unusual, because Africa is the richest continent, home to vast natural resources, diverse ones. It is only natural that such a fast-growing economy, I'm referring to the Chinese economy, needs reliable supplies of mineral resources to its rapidly growing market. I believe that is the reason underlying the Chinese activity in Africa, in the South African Republic in particular. Regarding the relations between Russia, China, and the South African Republic, Brazil, and India, they are becoming more fundamental because
работаем в рамках известной растущей
All of us are working
объемом торговли
within the framework of
Международной организации
a growing, in terms of its authority, organization, the BRICS organization. Regarding the prospects for further relations between Russia and China,
Китай самый крупный наш торговый
well, we can say that China is one of the largest trade partners of Russia.
миллиардов долларов по прошлому году.
I might be mistaken, but last year our trade volume was more than 83 billion US dollars. So there are lots of promising projects in the pipeline in the power sector, which is quite natural. I'm referring to the great resources in the east of Russia and the need to develop Chinese territories adjacent to Russia. And it is not surprising that we supply these resources and we increase the supplies of oil and gas. So we start to implement these large-scale projects.
Сотрудничество к этому только не сводится.
But our cooperation does not only boil down to the oil and gas sector. As you might know,
В области атомной энергетики, а это все
there is a large-scale nuclear power construction in China, construction which is based on high technologies. So we built a nuclear power plant there, and there is a special program for joint activities in this area for the future. There are huge prospects for the development of infrastructure and transport sector.
большие проекты в области авиации.
We're working on large-scale projects in the area of aviation, as well as many other areas of mutual interest. In this context,
Совместной работе
our BRICS partners joining these joint efforts would be of
интересно.
great interest for us, and it would be very promising. For example, I'm referring to the nuclear power sector. One of these projects is under consideration with the participation of the South African Republic. And not only this,
Вариантов сотрудничества
there could be lots of very interesting opportunities for cooperation within the framework of the financial institutions that we have established.
банка и пула
Both the Bank of Brings and Contingency Reserve arrangement
100 миллиардов долларов. Это большие
with a
ресурсы, которые
capitalization of 100
должны и
billion each, huge resources which are to be used for the purposes of mutual development.
Do we have other questions? Sector 5.
Mr. President, thank you for your time. I'm Steve Lantis. I'm a portfolio manager with Delaware Investments in the United States. Russia adopted a fully floating ruble in a somewhat more dramatic fashion than many of us would have envisioned a year ago. But it's been clear that the steps you undertook have ensured that the economy is on a more stable path than we've seen in the crises in 1998 and 2008. And as a member of the international investment community, we applaud the fact that you undertook these steps without any restrictions on the free movement of capital. But I wanted to ask you at this time, are there any circumstances that you can envision where the political leadership in Russia would make a change in that direction and put restrictions on the free movement of capital? Thank you.
Вы вспомнили о кризисных явлениях.
Well, you recall the crisis of 2008 and 2009.
Сейчас сказали и о
Right now, you've mentioned the decision of the Central Bank of Russia on the introduction of the free-floating rate of the ruble. In 2008 and 2009, we didn't do that because we believed that back then the Russian economy was not ready to undertake such harsh steps.
и тогда мы действительно израсходовали
And back then, indeed, we used lots of our reserves in order to uphold the ruble exchange rate and managed to maintain economic stability. But even back then, we did not decide to introduce restrictions to the free movement of capital, and not we're going to do that right now. These are not the steps that we are going to undertake. I believe that we demonstrated to all our partners and investors, all those who invested into the Russian economy, that we were not going to do so. And that was one of the reasons due to which, for the first time in the second quarter of 2010, since that time until now, we have registered a direct inflow of investments. That is why, let me stress once again that we are not going to introduce any sort of restrictions as to the free movement of capital. Regarding the introduction of the free floating rate, there could be some shortcomings for some economic entities. There could be some shortcomings for our citizens, for physical entities, because it impacted the prices and inflation, which is a significant negative consequence for the Russian economy and for Russian citizens. But on the whole, for Russian economy and eventually for Russian citizens, that is the step that was taken on a timely manner.
We offered some limitation steps, and you said it won't happen. We didn't do the reforms to reverse this trend, and I can't remember of a single occasion when this came into discussion. And investors keep asking about it. It's one of the big concerns for them, something which they feel.
Well, you know, there are lots of ways to introduce restrictions. There could be full bans, quasi-bans that have to do with reserve ratio, with certain volumes. None of this is included into our plans.
Are we going to have any other questions? Sector 8. Let's not ask only the people in the front rows to ask questions.
My name is Trent DeBruin. I'm with Driehaus Capital Management of the United States. Mr. President, this spring, after a 2-year pause, the second pillar of the pension system started working again as before, with funds being transferred to NPFs. However, in September, there was already talk again about a new freeze. To the outside observer, this risks looking like uncertain decision-making, and that in turn raises question marks about the visibility on other elements of long-term economic policy. In addition, freezing payments would have direct effects on the long-term savings of the economy. In your view, what can be done to ensure that key long-term policy decisions are taken in a consistent manner and that they agree with the long-term strategy which has already been announced? Thank you.
В экономике, так же, как во многих других.
Well, in economy, in the same way as in many other areas, there should always be a compromise between what we are able to achieve and what we desire to achieve. First of all, what we need is a balanced pension system. Today's revenues are not that high as expected or desired. That is why extending this freezing of the accumulative part of the pension system has to do with this very circumstance and with the need to balance out the pension system in order to guarantee stable revenues and stable payments to all the pensioners of Russia. Well, you've mentioned that there is something that is being changed. Well, in this case, nothing has changed because last year we introduced freezing in the same way as this year. But let me note that we are not canceling this program and we are not going to introduce drastic changes into these plans because we believe that the cumulative part of the pension system is going to develop in Russia in the future. In this context, let me note that my colleagues, and me included, would like this pension system, in the same way as the United States and many other countries, to be used not only by our reputable colleagues from the Ministry of Finance, which withdraw these sources from the market and exchange them into their own securities. We want these resources to be invested into the economy. That is the challenge we need to address. If there are significant reserves accumulated, what we need to do is, first of all, that these resources are guaranteed for the future pensioners, and that they are efficiently fluctuating in the economy, circulating in the economy. And at the same time, we need to preserve these resources. So all of these components are to be implemented, and I believe that it will be done, and only then the cumulative part of the pension system is going to develop. First of all, it will be preserved, and secondly, we're going to invest into its future development.
Okay, Sector 3.
Benjamin Sorano from EMSO Partners. The sub-5% inflation target seems to have been pushed back once again, and I think that's somewhat understandable given the events of the past 12 months. But I think it's worth bearing in mind what other countries have suffered as they've deviated from these targets and the difficulties they've had regaining control of such metrics. Could I ask you, relative to other priorities, such as restoring economic growth, job creation, reserve build, etc., how important is achieving the inflation target?
Ну, конечно, все эти макроэкономические параметры.
Naturally, all of these macroeconomic parameters are very important. I've mentioned it repeatedly, as well as my colleagues. They might have mentioned it today. There is a well-established pattern we are going to achieve. In order to meet all these macroeconomic parameters, we need to work hard, but none of these parameters should contradict the other. Mr. Kostin has mentioned that even today here at the panel there was an argument which took place between the speakers, and the same very debates can be observed at the government meetings. There is yet another one which is to take place today, and all the time the same question is being asked: what is more important? As the finance ministry says, to meet such a macroeconomic parameter as inflation, whether it is the task of the central bank, or to reduce the federal budget expenditures, hoping that the economy will get more money. A question which is very controversial. One can hardly answer that in precise terms, but at the same time it is hard to disagree with it. On the other hand, the Ministry of Economic Development demands more resources in order to support the real economy of Russia. It says it's okay if inflation parameters are a bit higher. I believe that the figure for the next year would be 6%. The inflation target would be 6%, and for subsequent years it would be 4 or 5%. It's clear that for the developed economies, the inflation target is 2, 3, or 4%. That is the best possible figure, and that's what we would try to achieve. The question is how soon we'll be able to get to this target. It's difficult to predict right now. Well, I believe in 2017, 2018, but probably by 2017 we'll be able to meet the target of 4. Can you imagine that 4%? Well, we hope that the central bank would manage to do that and will survive. Well, the thing is that what is the toolbox of the central bank? The monetary volumes and the impact it has on the national currency exchange rate. But regarding the emissions of the money volume in economy and correlation to the targets, to the inflation targets, the ratio this year is the lowest. So central bank allocated the least amount of money into economy, and deflation turned out to be higher. And that is only one of the parameters. That is why more attention should be given to other factors. The priority here is the diversification of economy in order to reduce dependence on energy resources and so-called traditional export. We need to reduce red tape of our economy, and we need to create reliable conditions conducive to the normal functioning of the administrative agencies and legal system. That's the areas we're working on, but one can hardly address all those challenges over 1, 2, or even 5 years. But we know what we are to do and how to move to that target.
Sector 7, please.
Mr. President, Jeff Cutmore from CNBC. Thank you for the question. Mr. President, over the weekend, US President Obama called into question your leadership over Syria. He said that you are propping up an ally rather than going after ISIS. He also said you're running down the economy here. Can I ask you, how do you respond to President Obama's comments? And what would you say to international investors who are dissuaded from putting money into the Russian economy because of such remarks? Thank you.
Вы как-то, знаете, как у нас говорят?
Well, as we say, you mixed apples and oranges together. And there are many other jokes when people are trying to create a hodgepodge of various things. How does it have to do with investments into Russia? Although everything is interconnected. No direct links here, but everything is interconnected. Well, first of all, I'm not going to get into these debates with anyone, but let me be clear. We're not going to get into leadership in Syria. There's only one leader in Syria, which is the Syrian people. What we are trying to achieve is to contribute into the fight against terrorism, which is a threat both to the United States, to Russia, to European countries, and the whole world without any exaggeration. Let me draw your attention to the fact that all our actions, as I've mentioned, fully comply with the UN Charter and international law, contrary to the actions of our colleagues from the so-called US-led international coalition, which is acting without any UN Security Council resolution and invitation of the Syrian authorities. The US-led operations have been lasting for more than a year, but to put it simply, just the actions of the United States. They engaged 11 countries to the airstrikes. More than 500 airstrikes were executed on the territory of Syria. According to official statistics, $500 million US were spent to train and equip militants of the Free Syrian Army to fight against ISIL. And what are the results? There are none, actually. And right now, the Free Syrian Army is being supplied with ammunition and all necessary military equipment. So where is this Free Syrian Army? If this ammunition is dropped from the air on the territory of Syria, won't it get back in the same way as when the personnel of the Free Syrian Army was trained and equipped? Won't it get back to the hands of the ISIL? It has taken place, actually, and the United States have recognized that it was a failure, and right now they are keeping distributing ammunition and the military hardware and equipment. The question is, who will get a hold of those ammunitions? And it is not a rhetoric question. We've heard that right now our pilots are striking against the wrong targets, which do not belong to the ISIL. And what we offer to our partners, but first of all, we informed in advance the leadership of the United States. Contrary to the United States, they have never done so, and we were the first one to do so because we would like to show respect and to establish business contacts with them. And the first thing we hear right now that first they are not ready to cooperate with us, and secondly that we are attacking the wrong targets. At the military level, we asked them to give us the information regarding the targets that they believe are 100% belonging to terrorists. And what we receive as an answer, we are not ready to do that. Then the second question was asked. Please tell me what targets should not be attacked by us. No answer received.
So what shall we do then? This is no joke. I haven't been inventing things. It's true. It was not long ago. We made this proposal not long ago. Give us targets that we should not pound. No response. So how shall we work together then? Do you have an answer? Neither do I. And probably some of our partners have a mingle in their heads. They don't have a clear understanding of what happens on the ground and what their goals are, but will work persistently in order to have common efforts in fight against terrorism, international terrorism, and have predicted and clear results, focusing the international terrorists, eliminating this threat for all of us.
So the economic discussion goes on.
With respect to investments, as I said, I believe these are not interrelated things, but when I've been telling you all this story, from the outset, probably you noted that I mentioned that no one ever warned us about such military action, and we did so. We have done so, which means that we aim at working together. And those who are willing to do so in the sphere of security and fight against terror, and in economic sphere, they are welcome.
Sector 2, please.
Thank you for being here. My name is Inachos Lazos. I'm from Discovery Capital in Connecticut. It's another question on Syria. Yourself and Minister Lavrov over the last 2 weeks offered exhaustive explanations of the logic behind Russia's latest actions in Syria. In light of your meeting with President Obama in New York, what is your personal assessment of the feasibility for forming a basis in the form of a UN Security Council resolution for a joint grand coalition action against the Islamic State? Or is this a level of interest you sense from Western counterparts in such course really low? Thank you.
I believe that it's in our common interest, and our conversation with President Obama that took place in New York was quite detailed and I believe frank and sincere. On the whole, we saw the interest of our partners in joint work. But as of today, unfortunately, I emphasize that it's unfortunate, we have cooperation between our military only. Only in matters of military and technical nature, like comparing the friend or foe signals of our aircraft, which is indeed a sign of mutual trust, by the by, and we have other technical parameters to coordinate and that are being coordinated, but this is not enough, I believe. And I think that if we want to be efficient, not just pounding or bombing, if we want to arrive at a political settlement, we should encourage the forces inside that country, and this is a very complex conflict, So we should encourage them to work together between themselves, which is the main thing. And we should work with those whom we can influence, like us, the United States and Europe. We should bring them down to a negotiating table so that they start the political reconciliation process, which is not something we have been able to arrive in our joint efforts with the US and the EU, well, primarily with the US. We have come up with a proposal to organize a high-level political meeting and military meeting in Moscow. I said that I am ready to send a high-profile delegation to Washington to discuss the settlement in Syria, but we have received no answer as of today. And by the by, I believe that could be indeed a high-profile delegation on the Russian part, headed by the chairman of the government, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, for instance, and it could also comprise military, like deputy chief of staff of the, or probably special services representatives. We should work on the substance if we are to be efficient, but we also are to cooperate with the regional players like Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Jordan. It's a small state, but it borders on Syria with Iraq. Yes, there's a great deal of mutual suspicion and claims, but unless we work with them, no solution is found, and we hope that we will be able to make headway in this domain, political domain.
Shall we talk about the pension system again? Maybe? Section 6?
Finistar Capital in London. Sorry, just to continue on the Syrian theme for one more second. Can you give a few words on how you see the relations between Russia and Turkey going forward? There seems to be some tension on the Turkish side about the recent developments. Is there dialogue with Turkey? Where do you see this going forward? Thank you.
Turkey is one of our priority partners and our good friends. We have a very warm relationship with Turkey, and we have had it for a number of years. It's one of our main trade and investment partners. Just look at our construction market and sector. Over the past years, we have seen around 12 billion of investments on the part of the Turkish companies. And we supply a great deal of energy to Turkey. We have major joint projects in the energy sector, agriculture. Turkey has been able to increase the supplies of agricultural produce to our market, which indeed is in the interests of the Turkish economy and their nationals and their people. We are to understand how we can forge cooperation on the anti-terrorist track, and Turkey has a lot of concerns with respect to the Kurds factor and fight against terrorism, and we are aware of those concerns and ready to take them into account in our cooperation. But now our military maintain contacts, and I hope that we'll have coordination in place. We should have political coordination as well as with the United States.
Thank you. Sector 5, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Richard Lamb. I work at Lloyd's of London in the UK. The Bank of Russia has started implementing the plan to create a national ratings agency. The requirements of such an agency are clear: to protect the national financial system against the risk of losing the services currently provided by the international rating agencies. However, do you not think that the appearance of such an agency, supported by the government and the prominent business groups, could damage the chances of competing Russian rating agencies and correspondingly limit the competition in this important sector? Thank you.
может повредить чему?
Can damage, pardon me, what? The competitiveness of the agency, it's not here yet. And when it appears, when it's established, it's going to be an additional player to enhance competition among structures of such kind. And I believe that there is nothing bad about this. It'll benefit the sector, both globally and domestically as well. You may remember how nervous our European partners were several years ago when they believed that global or American, primarily rating agencies, in order to reduce the competitiveness of European economy versus their American peers, they came up with rating assessments targeting European enterprises and businesses, and such suspicion was heard on the expert and governmental level and has been heard. So I believe that the implementation of a Russian National Rating Agency will not make things worse in this domain, but will make them better. The most important thing is that it's a highly professional agency and independent in all the senses. So it's presumed that all the participants will not have a share of more than 5%, and there'll be a number of stakeholders out of private companies, not only companies with government participation, but all the efforts of such kind must be devoid of any kind of lobbyism on national or some other grounds. And I expect that the managing bodies will comprise world-class, high-notch specialists, no matter what their nationality is.
Let's continue our discussions, dear colleagues. Sector 1, please.
President Putin, James Esdale from Bury Palmer and Lowell in London. What effect do economic sanctions have on the global economy? In connection with this, how substantial is the threat of the global financial system fragmenting? Can we talk about the end of globalization, at least in the form that we have known it over the last 25 years? Thank you.
The United States, when it created the GATT, there was further reconfigured into the WTO, and that sucked in the majority of the international economic stakeholders. Well, for export-oriented economies, the WTO principles are correct and promising, because the single currency and the US dollar per se is the only global reserve currency, and then lifting national barriers was the right thing to do, with some additional benefits for member states of that organization, and it aimed at removing national borders and barriers and providing the national treatment to all other economic agents in other countries, and the MFN treatment and all other things, you know. With respect to limitations and the fragmentation of the system with the help of sanctions, we view the topic as a matter of non-bona fide competition, unfair competition. And I believe it can be bad for everybody. I'm not speaking about damage or losses of our European partners and its scores of billions of dollars as a result of our counter-sanctions. But anyway, it's a It's a manifestation of all these negative repercussions are a manifestation of such practices of doing business internationally. Here in Russia, we believe that the economic rules of the WTO are fundamental and stark and unshakable, and they should not be related to politics, but it proved not to be the case, and the economic toolkit is used to gain competitive advantages in the economy and to attain political goals, which is quite harmful for everybody, and we should somehow come to terms to drop this practice altogether in future.
Thank you. Sector 4, please.
Good afternoon. Jason Trujillo with Invesco Advisors. And thanks, Mr. President, for your time. It's certainly much appreciated. Recently, the governors of Sakhalin and Komi Republic were arrested and currently face some very serious charges. Can you comment on those events, please?
I think that it's going to be premature to speak of this. In Russia, as in any other civilized country, there is the presumption of innocence unless there is a verdict and a sentence of the court. The law enforcement have grounds to believe that crimes, grave crimes have been committed and offenses, but giving any comment before the investigation is over and the decision of the court, the ruling of the court is there, is not quite correct and is counterproductive, is harmful for the process of investigation and trial. And the judiciary should make their own conclusions. With respect to fight against the corruption, we believe it's one of our paramount goals, and we'll do that domestically, and we have approved a number of decisions that put caps on some people engaged in administrative occupation, starting with the federal and down to the regional level. We will enhance the oversight system and the work of the law enforcement and the judiciary. And definitely we will contribute to international efforts, like in November in St. Petersburg, a UN-led forum on that matter is to be held, and Russia as the host country will actively participate.
Thank you, Sector 3. Christina Vares from Nuts Capital. My first question will be very simple. What share of your time you spent on economic and infrastructural issues, and what share of your time you spent on international conflicts such as aid and military?
First is 80% at least, even probably more.
And the second question, probably more specific. The foreign investors, in order to come to Russia, they have to have some showcase, some example. And for instance, the Russian pension money is invested only by 1/3 into shares, so not very attractive for foreign investors. Speaking about the real sectors of the economy, Russian roads or motorways are so dangerous that about 27,000 people would be killed in accidents. So again, just for foreign investors, it's not very safe to come to Russia physically.
You think foreign investors travel between Oryol and Voronezh cities? I have doubts. Foreign investors will call on us to go by plane. And with respect to roads, yes, it's a well-known problem for this country because we have very vast dimensions. We're the biggest country in the world in terms of our square area, and we have a lot of remote areas with no road network at all, which is first. Second, the standards of road construction of ours are even more stringent than those of many European countries, but the climatic conditions are different. So there are some objective and subjective difficulties, but anyway, one of ways to develop our economy is invest in infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, airports, and machine engineering, aircraft construction, and vehicle construction.
Probably the last part of my question. What economic or investment issue is most attractive for you?
You have named one of these, infrastructure development. Given the economic hard context, it has always been rendered as a priority measure that in the mid and long term can give good returns for our economy, and we believe it's going to be so.
So the discussion about the roads started early in the morning because one of the speakers, Mr. Galitsky, who is the owner of a whole range of points of sale and retail shops, he said that money is not needed to facilitate economic growth, but more people should be born rather than the one who die. I think that that's quite fair. We have to invest into the human capital, into the human resources, and therefore the demand inside the country would go up. So several more questions. Probably final 3 questions, and that's it. Sector 8. Yes, please. Our British colleague, partner. I have a question about competition, just like the previous speaker. My question is about the policy of the government aimed at demonopolization. And I asked this question at the very first VTB Capital Forum 7 years ago, and the President or the then Prime Minister answered positively at my question, where the demonopolization of the gas market take place. So it happened so, and therefore the added value was created for 10 kbp, which is now part of Rosneft and a number of other companies. So we're speaking about the merger of 2 agencies, the Antitrust Authority and the Federal Tariff Authority. How should the investors understand this or interpret this solution? Will it open the way for further demonopolization of the most important sectors, such as railway transportation or power generation? That's a question. And probably the representatives of the international business in Russia will also share their views about the competitive environment.
So regarding the demonopolization of the railroad transportation and power sector, yes, we would follow that path. Even more so, I personally believe that what regards the railroad transportation, these questions are long overdue, both regarding the Russian railroad position, according to which they cannot lose control over some elements of this business. I believe that this position is very inconclusive, because through the traffic control system they would manage to maintain some sort of a control. That is why additional demonopolization of the system is very timely and it should be implemented. The same holds true of the power sector. We should watch carefully what will happen at the market. I'm referring to the tariff situation. Regarding the merger of the 2 services, nothing new about that. The decision was made due to the fact that we needed to avoid any overlapping between the services to make the work of the services more efficient and address the challenges that you've mentioned right now. We wanted to make demonopolization of Russian economy more efficient as a whole. Now, regarding our goals in this area, well, our efforts in this area, well, you know that we intensified the activities of those agencies, and relevant decisions were made at the legislative level. We introduced greater responsibility for monopoly conspiracies. We even introduced the criminal responsibility, liability for these developments, which was not the case before. That was done based on the assessment of the work of similar structures in other countries, including the United States and Great Britain. And from the point of view of our practice, there is, again, nothing unusual because the federal anti-monopoly system and federal tariff system were born in 2004 based on the anti-monopoly ministry. And after they worked separately, the experience has demonstrated that it would be more efficient for them to join their efforts and to be more efficient.
2 questions more. Well, let me choose. Sector 8.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Bridget Hadebe. I'm from South Africa. I actually met you the last time you came for the BRICS Business Summit. We took pictures with our president. I'm the president of the South African Mining Development Association, which is a mining chamber in South Africa. And I'm also the co-chair of the Russia-South Africa Business Forum in BRICS. My observation within the BRICS context is that we have 2 very dominant countries in Russia and in China. And the amount of effort that Russia contributed towards the political liberation of the African countries during the colonialist time was very dominant and very fundamental. And I feel and we see that the economic dominance is not enshrined, and there would potentially be a risk of replacing the foreign direct investments from Europe with that of China, because the Chinese are extremely, very, very active in the African economy, and would like to see more prominent Russian participation in terms of the oil and gas and minerals. We have created a BRICS bank for infrastructure. It would be very unique to create also a resources bank. And maybe go beyond that and look into a BRICS stock exchange. And when you look at a stock exchange and maybe model it according to the flow-through share syndromes, flow-through shares that might translate into tax incentives for those producers in the oil, gas, and minerals that are investing in those BRICS stock exchange. No, I'm just talking about the paradigm shift beyond what we started by creating the BRICS Infrastructure Bank. And we would then like to pursue further interactions beyond that. You are aware that you have not been sanctioned in BRICS. Africa is the economy of nearly 1 billion consumers, and we're well endowed with minerals, and there are lots of opportunities. So let's see what we can create beyond what we started in terms of BRICS, and would welcome everybody else to participate. And please be aware of the dominance the Chinese are playing in the African economy. There's a Chinese in every country, wherever you go. And, we want the Russians to be a little bit also active. Take into account that you played a very dominant role in our political liberation, and those economic benefits must match the role that you played. Thank you.
Большое спасибо.
Well, thanks a lot. One shouldn't be afraid of any investments. If they're well conceived and if they're received by a sovereign state, these investments should be for the benefit of the country where these investments are allocated. And now it is up to the state itself to introduce rules regarding the investments which would be beneficial for the source of these investments and the receiver of those investments. Well, your comment is not a question, it is rather a proposal, a concrete proposal regarding the development of the common stock exchange and many other infrastructure aspects. Well, all of it can be achieved, particularly since the Bank of Infrastructure Investments is starting its work, as you've mentioned, as well as the contingency reserve arrangement. So we need to have expert consultation. Thanks for your proposal and for your comment.
Last question, Mr. Agarwal. This is a major partner of Rosneft and one of the major industrialists from India. He came with a huge delegation, both in terms of oil and gas and metals. You're welcome.
Thank you, President Kostin. Your Excellency, I'm Ravi Ruya from the SR Group in India. We are involved in the oil refining and exploration business, in the steel business, in the infrastructure business, and in the power generation business. In the recent past, we have been working very closely with Rosneft. We have now signed a long-term 10-year agreement to buy crude oil from them into India. This will be the first time after several years that India would actually be getting crude from Russia. We have been working closely with VTB Bank, who have supported us in the recent past. And in fact, I can tell you that both Rosneft and VTB today have become very well known in India because of these transactions. We are now looking at further investments on both ways, both into India by Rosneft and VTB, as well as two-way from our side into the Russian economy. Your Excellency, Russia has always supported India in the time when India needed help. And I think, and as you well know, India has always been very grateful for that. And even today, all the political leadership in India continues to maintain that India will continue to support Russia in every possible way. From our side, the question I have is, other than the political side, how do you really see Russian economic cooperation with India, particularly in the private sector? Because in the recent past, the real investment or the real cooperation has been between Russian government entities and Indian government entities. But increasingly, we see a role for Indian private entities and Russian private entities, as well as Russian state-owned enterprises. We would like to see what is really the commitment and how really interested is Russia in developing this relationship with India in different sectors.
Вы знаете, нам очень бы хотелось.
Well, you know, we would want this vast political potential of our cooperation that have been established throughout decades, huge mutual trust potential, as well as mutual love between the peoples of the two countries could be transformed into concrete projects. And the economic potential between our countries hasn't been tapped yet. India is a huge country with a population of billions of people, with the market economy which is very dynamic. Yes, indeed, we have maintained our economic cooperation thanks to the efforts of the governments of the two countries, but our goal is to make the government efforts a trigger to step up cooperation at the private level, at the level of private companies. There are lots of private companies in India. Most of them are already present in Russia, particularly in the area of the pharmaceuticals and many other areas. There are lots of huge, promising projects, and we would want to engage private companies for joint activities both in Russia and India and together on the territory of the third countries. Let's work together to use all the existing tools, the intergovernmental cooperation, business community forum, so that we could identify and implement these opportunities. Well, 3 more questions from the third, the second, and the first sectors. Well, we are lucky. Sector 4, you've raised your hand. Please, the floor is yours. Please stand up.
My name is Jakub Vermigres. I'm from ICE Capital. I have a couple of questions concerning the following. The truce in Ukraine, is it stable or not? Will the Minsk agreements be implemented? And finally, is there any chance that Europe will split with Russia?
Well, you should address the last question to Europe or to those who make relevant instructions, but located in a bit different place. Now, on Ukraine, as I've mentioned, there can be no alternative to the Minsk agreements. One cannot keep insisting that Russia should implement them to the full. It is becoming absurd. It is becoming ridiculous. Not only ridiculous, it is actually absurd. The most important that should form the core of the settlement process in the southeast of Ukraine is the political process. And what does the political process imply? 3, 4, or even 5 components. The first one, which is stipulated by the Minsk agreements, which is amendments to the constitution on a permanent basis, upon the coordination with Donetsk and Luhansk. No amendments have been made, and everything that has been achieved at the preliminary stage hasn't been coordinated with Donetsk and Luhansk. At the same time, they keep speaking about internal political restrictions. But, well, there are restrictions everywhere, but there are also commitments to implement the Minsk agreements. And that there's not something that depends on us. It depends on Kiev and its willingness to coordinate with Donetsk and Luhansk. The most important thing to take into account is that it should be on a permanent basis. In the transitional provisions, there is a statement regarding the law on the special status of these territories. And they keep insisting that it is on the permanent basis, but one shouldn't forget that the law was taken for 3 years, and 1 year is already over, and it's not our obligation to make these to make this law a permanent one. Then the amnesty law should be adopted. It is again provided for by the Minsk agreements. We cannot adopt this law in Moscow. And how can a political dialogue be carried out when these people are under the threat of criminal charges? Is it up to us to do that? Why are we always told that we should implement these Minsk agreements? Why should they put all the responsibility upon us? What is it done for? If we are truly willing to implement the Minsk agreements and based on these agreements to address the problem, we should implement all the obligations arising from the Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements provide for the Ukrainian Rada adoption within 30 days after the Minsk agreements were signed. Well, was it done so? Yes, formally it was done so. The Verkhovna Rada decision was made, but yet this law includes Article 10, which hasn't been coordinated with Donbas, which suspended the application of this law with regards to all the articles from the second one to the 9th one. So formally, they have carried out this, implemented this commitment. But nothing like that happens in reality. We know that there are certain political restrictions, but nevertheless, all the commitments should be implemented. Now, the law on elections. The Minsk agreements stipulate that this law should be coordinated upon with Donbas. The Ukrainian parliament adopted this law without any coordination with Donbas, irrespective of the fact that the representatives of Donbas for 3 times have sent their proposals regarding this law. So the relevant law was adopted, and in the law it was stated that there are not going to be any elections in these territories, and a result of which the representatives of these territories decided to independently carry out these elections. Then they kept asking them to reschedule these elections. Well, yes, they accommodated this request. They rescheduled the elections, but what now is needed is to organize all the procedure to implement this law, and the compromise searching process would be very difficult, although there is no way out of this. So again, despite all the political restrictions, it is up to our colleagues from Kyiv to do that. And finally, economic rehabilitation of the territories, because right now they are under full economic blockade. What we are told is to provide access to the humanitarian assistance from Ukraine to these territories. But the Donbas representatives insist on removing this blockade, and then there will be no need in humanitarian assistance. So lots of problems there, although the majority of them are beyond our competence. Can our colleagues see that in Europe and United States? I believe they can. And I have all the grounds to believe that they actually realize what the difficulties are. But it is not that convenient for them to state that today the Kyiv authorities are not capable of addressing those challenges. It is easier for them to put the blame on us and to insist on increasing our influence by 6 times. But how could we do that? What we need is to make our partners implement their commitments, and those who could have an influence on them should do that as well. That is why working together we could achieve positive results. Now the third sector, somewhere in the middle, back there in the middle. Please stand up. Please give the mic to the speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Mikhail Shapkov. I work for the Verny Capital Fund. My question has to do with small and medium-sized businesses. Andrei Leonidovich has just, well, in the last session said, should we issue loans to small and medium-sized businesses? There's high level of risk, and that's not what I said. I can repeat what I said. Don't change my words. Maybe I misunderstood. Keep going. Well, the point I want to make is this. Are we going to see development of SMBs in Russia? Looking at the statistics, currently, I think the contribution of SMBs in GDP is about 20%. Look at developed economies. In England, they have 50% contribution. In some countries, it goes up to 80%. When export markets begin to collapse, when there are external conditions, a country should still have this sector, which will support a country's economy. So what is it going to be like in this sector?
Well, the answer is obvious, and you probably know it. Naturally, we know all that you've been saying, but the point is that it has always been underdeveloped. In the Soviet times, we never had it at all, and we started from scratch after 1991, so new environment, better framework should be provided, starting with the incorporation rules for companies and then provision of energy access and infrastructure access and premises, investments. We should reduce the tax burden, both with respect to social and welfare payments and taxes per se, and the supportive measures of the government, you know them quite well as well. We are in close cooperation, in close contact with small and medium enterprises, and we've been considering and studying all the proposals of yours. I will not speak about special purpose support mechanisms via the Neshekonom Bank and the money that is allocated to small and medium enterprises at the regional level. This is probably insufficient, but the main thing is to provide the favorable environment, and we know that, and given the current economic context, we will do so. We'll provide this favorable environment. Don't you doubt, please.
I said that it makes sense to criticize when there is a demand. It makes sense to provide loans when there is a demand for the products that the companies are making. If they're making something that nobody needs, it's a different story.
Probably the colleague meant a different thing. Despite the drop in the policy rate, it was 19%. Now it's 14% of the average interest rate, and it can be a bit lower for good borrowers with a good track record. So the central bank and the Russian government are coming up with special measures to support SMEs via the regional level and directly providing trust funds to real projects. But we should reduce the bar, put the bar down, so that more companies can get the project finance. The bar shouldn't be too high. And small and medium enterprises should be able to approach these sources of funding. So we are in close contact with SMEs, and we will continue. Thank you. Well, the third sector 3, please. Or this one, this row. Anyone willing? Yeah? No. Okay, great. Oh, you still have a question? Oh, all right.
Good afternoon, Vladimir Vladimirovich, colleagues. I'm Vladimir Korobkin from Gazprom Neft. Panelists in the previous session were undecided on whether investment in oil and gas industry should be stimulated. I would like to hear your opinion, Vladimir Vladimirovich, especially in the context of project financing. Resolution 244 has been mentioned several times. We understand that it does not apply to our industry and its projects. Do you think it makes sense to pass a similar resolution that would create extra incentives for development of projects in the oil and gas industry?
Well, you know, it's quite natural, and it's no secret for you. When the price goes down, when the consumption goes down, investments peter out and disappear, which has been the case worldwide and in this country as well. So the companies, enterprises should see some promise about the market. If the planning horizons get narrower, the investments are on the wane, but eventually it entails in delays in introduction of new deposits, and there's a deficit and the prices start growing. And I'm sure, unfortunately, this will be the case for the global economy this time, but it does not mean that on the national level we shouldn't prop up our oil sector and promising projects. And despite our financial authorities' stance, we still consider different options, and they want to introduce some measures in your prejudice. But it's not about that we want to stem investments, or suspend investments in this sector. But Mr. Siluanov probably said that the finance ministry wants to withdraw some additional windfall profits originating from the slump in Russian currency, in the ruble. But experts and market participants know that initially it was about 600 billion rubles of additional payments, and eventually the finance ministry agreed to it, that anyway it should be much a lower sum, around 200 billion rubles. And the toolkit may be via duties and taxes and other things, but we are aware how important the oil sector is for this country and for our economy. And while striving for diversification and structural change, we will not do that at the expense of our oil sector, which has been efficient. I thank all of you, and I wish you well thank you, my gratitude.